This is a conversation with Dr. Naveen Thomas. Naveen is an AI enthusiast who has a PhD in computer vision from the University of Bristol. During his research, he developed novel algorithms that can detect moving objects from complex videos, and he used techniques such as spatio temporal volumes and background subtraction to analyze the type of motion performed by these objects and to further understand the video. He is passionate about the potentials of computer vision and AI, particularly in the healthcare industry. This is episode 2 of 2 with Naveen, and we got straight into what is happening in computer vision applications of AI and the developments being made in healthcare. We talked about AI on edge devices, about privacy, and the impact to AI accuracy of having more privacy. Naveen explained about precision and recall values, and towards the end he actually flipped the tables on me and started questioning me, which was fun but unexpected as the conversation turned philosophical as well. I enjoyed my conversations with Naveen, and I hope you do too. This is the Boundless podcast. If you enjoy it, please follow it, give it 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, and share it with your network. You can connect with me on LinkedIn and Twitter by searching Richard Foster-Fletcher. This episode was made possible by Barclays. I express my gratitude for their support and the use of their Cranfield Eagle Lab to record this episode. And now, here's my conversation with Dr. Naveen Thomas. Talk us through some of the most interesting use cases that are going on in AI. I'd like to start with computer vision, and then another area that's really exploding is healthcare. What are the most interesting things that you're seeing in those two areas?
Okay, so if I start with the computer vision side, because we've spoken already about surveillance in quite length. So computer vision is not a new topic, right? It's been around since, I think, the 1950s is when early research papers go back to. And the algorithms will be there for quite some time. But what's changed now over time is that the rest of the technology has played catch up. So the cameras have become better. The computing environment behind the scenes to process the camera feeds have become better. There's a lot more edge computing capability now. There's GPU-based, CPU-based processing, the center that you can use to then analyze all of that content. So the computing and the infrastructure that goes with AI algorithms have all advanced in a great amount. And that's when I think there's an explosion of use cases that are coming through. So if I start, let's say, with the consumer end, so our day-to-day lives, we all have smartphones, we take photos every day. And I personally use Google Photos quite heavily. There's so much AI built into photographs in general, right? So Google Photos, you can search for any object that you find in your photos, and it's actually looking inside the image itself, identifying the objects, classifying them, and then you're retrieving them when you're doing a search. That's entirely computer vision, right? You've got, it's using the classification algorithm in computer vision to then identify the objects as a dog, a cat, a car, cake, etc. So that's quite big. Then just taking the photo itself. So when you take your camera up and you do face recognition, face detection to automatically focus on the face, that's again computer vision, right? Many people don't realize that, but it's actually detecting your face and it's capturing the features from there. It's then focusing on that region that corresponds to the face. Again, computer vision. Then if you go away from your consumer goods out into, let's say, you get on the car and you're driving on a motorway, there's computer vision used there as well. So it's looking at traffic monitoring. It's looking at how much of a traffic there is in a particular queue on a lane on a motorway. And then from there, you can decide whether you want to reduce the speed limit on that area or not. Again, there's computer vision used there. Then there are lots of other use cases, like in sports, for example. In football, not so much in football, but in cricket, right, where you got it's a ball tracking, and you can actually do a graphical version of the ball hitting the wicket to see whether the person is out or not. Again, there's vision employed there. You've got to track the ball, track the positioning, and that's all computer vision. So there's a lot of computer vision in sports analytics in general. So another use case that, in fact, I used to work on a while back was in golf, where you can use a camera to then look at the way that you swing your racket, your bat, and it will actually look at whether your swing is good, how fast your swing is going, what's the angle, what's the posture of your body when you're doing the swinging. So all of that is, again, computer vision. Then if you go away from there. So you got into a retail sector, right? You've seen the Amazon Go shopping experience where you go into the supermarket, you pick a product, put in the basket, you again put it into a bag, you walk out of the store, and it's automatically taken payment from you based on all the objects that you've just taken from the shelf. So that's computer vision, because it's got to understand what it is you've taken out of the shelf. It's got to correspond that to the price of the object, and then take it from your payment system. So there's absolutely, computer vision is booming. It's everywhere, and more we're seeing actually adoption of this in healthcare. So that's the other domain you mentioned as well. So in healthcare, so currently there's a lot of shortage in staff in the UK. So radiology, for example, when you've taken an MRI scan and somebody has to analyze that scan to see whether a patient is suffering from cancer or not. That use case itself, it takes time to find time from a radiologist to come and inspect. Now, there's a lot of work happening in automatically detecting the cancer from an MRI scan, for example, so that you can then prioritize which scans the radiologist can focus on and give priority to. So your waiting time suddenly for the very extreme cases or critical cases suddenly goes down, because the systems identified this is a critical case and you need the radiologist immediately, and they can action it straight away. Whereas currently there's no way to know how critical that is unless you've already been diagnosed with it and you have a history behind it. If not, just from the image itself, there's no other way to know whether that patient is in a critical situation or not. The other angle within healthcare, we spoke about the concept of preventative maintenance earlier when applied to a lift, where you can go and fix the lift before it's broken already. Now, that same principle can apply to humans as well. If you can track the way the human body is performing, your heart rate, your gait mechanism, and a lot of other features about your body and the way that it's performing, you can actually start predicting when something is about to go wrong, if it looks like you're about to have a heart attack, perhaps. All of those things can be predicted, and then you can start taking preventative measures before something goes wrong. And for the heart, in fact, some of the work is already happening in London, where when heart monitors are kept and any slight deviation in the heart monitor rates can be detected early, so that before an adverse event happens, you've already identified that and given care to that patient. The other use case, I guess, in healthcare would be for pandemic situations, right? Looking at how viruses are spreading globally. So this current case of coronavirus, for example, if you could actually start seeing trends in a spreading of a particular virus before it gets to a pandemic stage, that would be fantastic. Then you can contain it within a small region. And if you, again, have algorithms that can actually identify which routes are most likely for that virus to spread by, then again, you can put measures in to try and control that. So there's a lot of work that can happen there. And coming back to some of the applications of computer vision, there was a conference in Dubai yesterday around the healthcare sector and how artificial intelligence is being used there. So one of the topics I talked about was trying to improve the whole ambulance through to care when they reach the hospital and treatment for critical injuries, right? So it started off by saying you could have autonomous ambulances. So currently, we have a shortage of ambulance and drivers at the moment. So if you had a lot of autonomous ambulances, then for an injury where there's already somebody at home who can care for the patient, who can help them to get into the ambulance and get them to the hospital, you could actually send an autonomous ambulance that might have a video feed inside it, that might have some of the simple diagnostics that can be used remotely by a doctor sitting anywhere in the country or, in fact, internationally. Then suddenly you've got much more possibility. You can start taking some of the less critical cases through this automated way. That means you save up the human-related ambulances to the more critical ones where you absolutely need a human intervention. Then once they've reached the hospital, that initial diagnostics again, if it's an injury, for example, you could have computer vision actually analyzing the injury to see how bad it is, how much of care is required for that particular injury. And then accordingly, you can again reduce, I spoke earlier about making the big a small problem. So the same principle applies here. You can start diagnosing your patients as they come into the hospital so that the doctors are not having to go through the full list of patients to classify them as critical or less critical. If that could be automated, then already the doctors are able to focus their attention on the critical patients, and the less critical can be looked at in other mechanisms. So there are ways then to start using the staff that you have on the ground in a more optimum and efficient manner. So these are just some of the use cases, right? But then the amount of use cases is just exploding like anything at the moment. And we'll just wait to see what other use cases actually come out from this in the next few years.
The healthcare example is very interesting. If we look at the UK and the US, we have very different healthcare systems. Obviously, over here we have the NHS, whereas over in the US we have more of a private commercial operation that's got a lot of big insurers and a big pharma presence in there. So what you're saying makes a lot of sense for an organisation like the NHS, which ultimately wants to drive down its costs all the time and provide healthcare with better efficiencies and more productivity. Flip that around, and actually preventative medicine in human beings would potentially lose a lot of money for some companies in other healthcare systems around the world. So are you seeing a pushback that actually these companies want healthcare to be a massive industry versus wellness or preventative medicine, which of course would destroy all the surgery and the drugs and potentially the insurance that comes later by somebody getting sick? You're not a politician, but what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, my personal experience, all I can talk about in this space here, but what I'm actually seeing is the contrary, right? So people are used to seeing such technologies being adopted, the use of smartphone and remote-based working, etc. People are used to seeing that now. And actually, I'm seeing that a lot of even private sectors, they are adopting that technology to actually attract more patients, if you like. So, for example, the whole concept of the Babylon type, the NHS surgeries, and even, I forget the other name of the company, but there are other private companies, Cignas, for example. You can actually use your smartphone and you can through a video call, see a doctor who might actually not be even within the same country as you. And you get instant access to a doctor. So, and we're very limited in how many doctors we have in the country, right? So there's only so much of them that you can use in the various hospitals. But if you have access to a global market of doctors, suddenly now you can get much better care. You can get instant access to a doctor. If you wanted an appointment within 5 minutes, you could get that if you adopted that model. So actually, on the contrary, I'm seeing it the other way around. So even the private sectors, they're seeing that by having such technologies and adopting it, you're giving better care to people, which in turn attracts more patients to join them as a practice. So I'm actually seeing it in the other direction.
Yeah, I see it's new models, isn't it? And we see this replicated across all industry that's being affected by artificial intelligence. It's neither good nor bad, but it is changing the business model in profound ways. And you were talking there about augmented vision, really, and so there would be nothing stopping somebody putting some augmented glasses on and then self-diagnosing a partner or a family member with a doctor seeing and hearing and able to diagnose much quicker. And the cost savings are huge. If you don't need to send a paramedic because it's benign,
absolutely,
it's millions and millions and millions.
Absolutely. And the whole concept of augmented reality is completely as another topic we could even talk for an hours on again, right? Because there, if you combine augmented reality with artificial intelligence, then the potential is endless. So imagine in a manufacturing environment, for example, currently, a lot of the teams who are using a machine, they might be following an instruction that's on a piece of paper on how to use that particular item. Imagine if you have augmented reality now built in with artificial intelligence. It's now able to guide the person with any machinery. You don't need to be trained on that machine. Anybody could come in and actually start working on it. The augmented reality could actually give you instructions on how to use that particular machine. It could keep a check on whether you're going through all the right safety checks. Are you wearing your hard helmet, for example? Are you in the right place at the right time? So are you a person that's allowed to be in that premise? Have you got the right access? And is your posture correct, for example, when you're lifting machinery? A lot of this can actually be automated now. And the augmented reality along with artificial intelligence can actually take the whole industry another level.
And that augmentation of people I find fascinating because you can also measure blood sugar levels and narcotics and sleep and stress. And if somebody's operating a crane in the middle of London, then it would be great to know that they're awake, that they're compos mentis, that they're not on any substances. What about simulation or projection, though? Let's say that we created this digital virtual version of you, Naveen. How possible will it be to simulate the future in terms of your diet or your exercise or your stress levels or your work or your exposure to certain chemicals or substances, and then see the effects that that's going to have in the future. Because if you talked about AI being beyond time and space when we get into digital twins, is that feasible to do that?
I think it's already happening to some extent. So there was a case recently where there was a hospital trialing out some artificial intelligence when applied to certain types of heart-based images. And the idea was that you try and diagnose if something has gone wrong with that heart or not. But a side effect of that, what it was doing was passing the whole data around about the heart through a neural network, and out was coming whether the heart is in a good condition or bad. But as a side effect, what happened was it started to predict very accurately when that person is about to die.
Do we want to know that?
That's a different tangent altogether. But the point is, there's side effects happening of this already. And initially, of course, the accuracy may not be that good initially. But I believe, if you have enough data about all of these things, there's a lot more you can do in terms of prediction. And it's about getting enough data, enough good quality data, and finding the right use cases where you can start predicting. So the use case I mentioned might be a little extreme, but there might be others where you might know, for example, how much of a blockage you've got in a particular artery. Right, and if you can start using the dietary information and the amount of health, the amount of exercise you're doing, and your blood cholesterol levels, all of this together, and you can start predicting how much of blockage you're going to start seeing in that artery over time, then suddenly now you've got a case where you can estimate when the best time is that you need to go to surgery or you need to use diet to control it. And there's multiple ways now you can start predicting how your care should be taken forward. So there'll be plenty of use cases like this. This is just one example where predictive maintenance will play a big factor in healthcare.
Talk to me about edge computing. What's being used now? What's in the pipeline? How is it game changing?
Oh my God! So edge computing is a big game changer already. So the previous days, in fact, forget edge computing for the time being. Just think 10 years ago, I had a PC at home. Maybe 15 years ago, I had a PC at home, which was a Pentium processor, which was a Windows 95, and I think it had 1 gigahertz processor with floppy disks that we use for storage. And if I remember right, I think it had something like 200, 300 megabytes worth of storage, right? So that was a state-of-the-art device at the time. And that machine was huge. It was from up to knee high. It was a proper desktop type device. The monitors were huge. Now, the smartphone that I carry in my pocket is so much more powerful than that device that I had in my room. So that alone says it. So the size of the processors, the size of computers, and the power that comes with it is reducing at such a drastic rate. And you've heard of Moore's law, which says how processor powers is going to keep increasing over time. And the size of computers have also reduced while the processing power has increased. So with that in mind, now we can actually get very powerful PCs inside a drone, for example. And that's really powerful because you can start doing processing of the data that you just captured in close to the location where the data is captured itself, so that you're not having to then send it across the wire to a central data center somewhere and start processing that. Again, in the remote location itself, you can start processing it first and then extracting only the meaningful or useful information and then taking that to the center. And that edge concept is going to play a part even in healthcare. You can start monitoring the heart, for example. You can keep a little PC close to you, which you can actually carry around with you. It can be a wearable PC at the edge, which is processing a lot of that information first and then taking that information centrally to do further processing if required. So it's making it possible for very complex computation to be done very close to you as an individual, rather than having to use networks and other infrastructure to perform such activities.
Does that increase the privacy and security of data then if you don't need to send it to the cloud?
It does, exactly. So you can remove all the sensitive information up front where the data is captured, and then send only the information that you need to back to the cloud. So that's one use case, of course, but there are many others that come in with that.
But when I think about Google, Azure, Amazon, and their data centers, I think how massive they are. And I understood that a lot of that compute power was being used for complex machine learning, deep learning models and algorithms. Surely we can't bring that level of AI intelligence, sophistication, into an edge device at the moment, can we?
You can, in fact. So a lot of these algorithms that are available on the cloud, the algorithms themselves and the software modules that make the AI, you can actually, many of those, they are making it available so that you can download it locally and have it running locally on a very small edge computer. What is different would be that the amount of data that you can process, because the cloud will have much bigger computers with much more processing power than you can fit on an edge, right? But the algorithms themselves could potentially be the same. So while, for example, take the computer vision algorithm, for example, which is on a drone, right, let's say, and it's detecting movement on a field, and it's classifying that movement to be a suspicious person on the field versus just maybe a dog running around. So that type of classification of that object that's moving in the scene, you could quite easily do that now on the edge, because you don't need very vast amount of processing power to be able to do that. And the algorithms behind it can quite easily be moved from the cloud and actually installed locally on your edge device.
Well, one thing I don't understand about that is, let's take Alexa for a moment. It's using my data, but in fact, probably the data from 150 million other devices and users to try and understand what I'm asking for. And it's going to get more sophisticated, and particularly around context, the context of the conversation as it develops, and the context in terms of what sort of situation are we in at the moment? Are we having a technical conversation? Are we having a sports conversation? So that it can start to align its terminology to the kind of conversation that I want to have. That to me feels like it needs the cloud, and it needs the shared data to make that Alexa the best it can be for me. An alternative might spring up, a Mycroft or something based on a Raspberry Pi. Yes, it's got a very powerful computer in it, edge computing, as you say, but is that going to be limited to just my data? And if I decide that I want that because it's got better privacy for me and better security for me, am I going to be losing out? And if so, how much am I going to be losing out on the shared power of these algorithms that are supporting the local devices now?
Okay, so if you look at an Alexa type device, there are two things that it's doing. Okay, so the first part is it needs to convert whatever voice we are speaking into a machine readable content. So it needs to change your voice into text, essentially. And the second part is the text that it's just received, it needs to understand the semantics of that text and turn that into some kind of meaning from it. So these are concepts from the natural language processing field of technology. So if you look at this as two different angles, the part that it's converting your sentence from voice into text, that area is where it needs to do a lot of learning from you as an individual, right? Because your accent is very unique. You're not going to have the same accent as perhaps somebody from Scotland. So the accent is very unique for the individual, and it needs to learn from you as an individual. But I don't believe the semantics part of it is actually learning from you as an individual. It's probably already got a trained data set out in the cloud where it's understood the semantics, and it's understood how to convert a text into a semantics of it and understand the meaning of it. Now, this is my speculation. I don't know exactly how Alexa has been built, but I would suspect that if I was building it, I would do it in these two phases. So the part where it's doing the conversion from your voice into text needs to be absolutely kept private, because that's your individual context. Whereas the part about the meaning, so let's say I am doing this podcast, that sentence there, what does that sentence mean, and how does that translate into, is it a positive, is it a negative, etc. That needs to be fed in from a central algorithm that can perform that translation for you. So that central algorithm, if you've already got a pre-trained algorithm there that's seen many sentences like this and knows how to translate it, then it's actually very meaningful for you. So there you definitely need to have the cloud to get any meaning out of it, any benefit out of it. But again, I'm sure they would have done this in a secure manner such that your data is not mixed with other people's data, and is streamlined in such that it just takes the features out of your sentence and then matches that against features of other sentences that is already learned and in the cloud, and it's the features that are being compared with each other. So your sentence itself is lost. Is the features from the sentences are extracted, and the features are used to be compared with each other. That's how I would design it. I don't know how Alexa itself works.
And if I was Amazon and I was getting all of that data, the one thing that would excite me most from a corporate profits perspective would be the ability to predict. And if you think about 150 million Alexas, maybe 10 commands, 10 conversations a day, the numbers add up very, very quickly in terms of the amount of data. Data that frankly wasn't even available a few years ago for anybody to use. Whether Amazon's got a monopoly on it, you could argue, but they've certainly got a lot of data. They could use that now to predict purchase behavior and predict other kinds of behavior, including we saw voting behavior. And is that where this fear of AI comes from, that a company or a country will get so good at predicting? And so two parts, are we predictable as human beings? And two, is the winner of the AI arms race going to be the company or the government that's able to predict the best from the data that they have?
Yeah, so there are two questions there, I think, in what you just asked there. One is around what is our personal views on our data being used to predict something, right? And to that, it's again a very personal opinion. Each individual will have a different views on this. I personally like it when Google predicts for me that my traffic is going to be very heavy this morning, so I need to leave slightly earlier for when I go to work. I really like that, right? Because it knows where my home is, where my workplace is, and accordingly, it's predicting for me what that journey is going to look like. Others may not like that feature. So I think what's important is that companies need to give people the choice to decide whether their data is being used in that fashion or not. And that's where a lot of the rules that we have at the moment, the GDPRs, the Data Privacy Act, all of these rules are in place so that companies are not exploiting the user's personal data without taking permission from them on how they're used. So that's number one. The other angle is, I think you asked about the prediction aspects, whether that gives companies authority because they are able to now predict trends about how people are behaving so that it can essentially get economical gain from it. Now, that aspect, I think, has already been there, right? So when we use our phones, for example, there's a lot of data that we are sending through those phones when we make phone calls about our GPS location, about how many people are traveling through a particular location. And in fact, a lot of that's already being used by companies. So if we think about this in terms of motorway traffic, for instance, to be able to predict how much traffic is going through a particular motorway, we don't really need to think about all the number of cars. All we need to do is look at the phone network and see how many calls are being sent through the phone from each network post. From there, we can quite easily see that, okay, there's a huge amount of traffic here, and this is where people are generally moving to. So there's actually data about us in places that we don't even expect there to be. And I think that's going to just continue to be in place. Where we do know about is where we start worrying about how the personal data is being used, etc. And it's right that we should be aware of it, and companies should be open about how that data is being used, so that people can make an individual choice about how that data is being used by companies. Does that answer the question?
It does, and I share your view that it's great to know what time to leave for work. If you and I had a restaurant, it's plausible though that we could get a very bad review on Google one day. And that would affect the algorithm. And then we might find that people driving on those maps looking for somewhere to stop and dine, we might find that we're going down that list, or we disappear entirely off that recommendation engine from Google because of that review that we've got. Something outside of our control, and something where we can't say to Google, actually, that was an unreasonable review, or that wasn't even somebody that really came to our restaurant. And that's a fear to me, really, in that if we're going to have black boxes in our cars that decide what our insurance rates should be based on our driving, then don't we need an opportunity to say to that insurance company, this happened at this time, and I drove like this, but let me explain why it was actually the safer thing to do. And it's the same reason that when people come over to my house, they start putting things on Spotify via Alexa, and I say, hey, hold up. I have tuned this algorithm to give me the music that I want. And now you're changing it. Now it's going to start recommending, modern jazz. No offense to modern jazz. And I need to be able to say to Spotify, it's not me. Recommend that for John, but don't recommend that for me. How can we input? How can we tell these algorithms what's the context so that it doesn't learn incorrectly and hurt us?
Yeah. So again, I think there were 2 points that you mentioned there. One is about us having a choice. So you talked about the restaurants there that are getting the bad review and therefore just disappearing off the maps essentially. Against that point, I think there's two sides to it. What I'm also seeing is that overall, the performance of these industries have actually increased over time because of such devices. So if you look at Uber, for example, the Milton Keynes in Uber I find is actually very good. The way the drivers drive, the way they talk to you, they actually want to try to do a good job for you so that they get a good review. So it's a double-edged sword. I understand in some cases they may not have a positive impact. In which case, I think companies or individuals need to be given the opportunity to choose whether they want to participate in that algorithm or be kept away from it. So that's one angle. The other angle is, as you said, with the Spotify, if a particular data value is augmenting the learning that is done, you need that ability to tweak it so that it doesn't keep giving you the modern jazz music, for instance. And I think a lot of these companies, they do offer that capability. So Netflix, for example, you can just remove that film from being used to predict, for example. And I think more algorithms need to do that and give people the choice. So it's all good, having the AI. You shouldn't be forced into using it, is what I feel. And as long as people still have the choice whether to go for it or not use it, then we're in a good place.
And we keep coming back to the same idea here, that you think that some mistakes or a little harm along the way shouldn't stop progress. Is that your view about AI, or is that your view about society and technology in general?
It depends on what the mistake is and how big that mistake, what the problem with that mistake is, right? So that is a very subjective point. So if it's a mistake, it's to accidentally show me the wrong film that I don't like on Netflix, that's no big deal, right? But if it's a mistake that's caused the surgery to go wrong and the patient has died as a result, then that's a big mistake. So I think this is where AI, I feel, will never completely overtake humans, right? Humans will always be there as a final gatekeeper. AI will always be a secondary tool that is used to make the human's life slightly easier for them. So there should always be a human that is evaluating the outputs from an AI algorithm and have the final say, so that you're not missing out and the AI is not making a drastic decision that is life-taking, essentially.
Keeping the human in the loop.
Absolutely. Keeping the human in the loop, but keeping the human above the AI to make the final decision. I think that's the key.
And how long is that going to be possible for as we look ahead into the years to come?
Yeah, so this is why this is an industry that's evolving, isn't it? It's a new market that people have not really explored before historically. So it's something that we will learn over time. We need to be aware of it, hence why we're having these conversations now. And there are lots of others also having the same conversation, so that we put the right governance in place to make sure that the AI does not go and overtake and cause harm to humans. That's absolutely got to be the primary objective. And then it's about making sure that the AI is used in a way that benefits humans and not hinders it. And that's something that we have to, as human race, we need to evolve and we need to learn how to govern and put in place the right steps.
Does the explainability of AI models bother you at this moment?
The explainability, so I'll go back to what I was talking about earlier around the precision and recall values. And I think it's very important that such values are publicly made available so that we know how good the algorithm is, and accordingly we can choose whether to use that algorithm for a particular use case or not. So if you look at the food industry, for example, when we go to a supermarket, we can quite easily see, okay, this has got this much sugar, this much fat content, this much salt, etc. So based on that, we're able to make a choice whether we want to eat that burger today or not. Same way, we ought to have a choice whether we want to use that particular algorithm or not. And that should be based on a set of standard criteria to measure how good that algorithm is. And this is an area I'm sure will evolve over time. But at the moment, we don't yet have that standards across the board to say how good a particular algorithm is.
Is that where we need blockchain to help us to understand the authenticity of certain AI models or how they're being used or the level of explainability?
So blockchain does something slightly different. So blockchain, the whole concept of it is that if you have tampered with a data set, then blockchain, you'll know through blockchain that, okay, this particular data set has been tampered with. So it's a very good tool set for things like contracts, for example, where you've signed the contract, and if somebody is tampering with that contract, you know straight away it's been tampered. Whereas for AI and how good that algorithm is, I don't think blockchain would play a part in that. But once somebody has released an algorithm, perhaps it would play a part in the sense that you know that, okay, the algorithm has come in an authentic manner. It's in a publicly recognizable, contractually signed environment. There it could play a part.
And right now we're dealing with this outbreak of coronavirus in China, around the world. If you had a magic wand and access to a whole bunch of AI resources and experts, what would you do? What in that position of leadership would you do to use AI to help the situation that we're in?
Yeah, I think, I mean, again, it's a personal opinion, right? I'm not in a position to talk through all of the details behind this, but what I would do is essentially two parts to this. One is to understand how the virus is spreading, find out, for example, which locations in the world might be most impacted, and then perhaps use historic trends to see, how a virus of this nature, it might be that they follow a particular trend, and if a flight goes along, then from the flight, there's probably chances that certain locations from there are probably higher at risk than others. There must be patterns that we can see in how a virus spreads from one location to another that we can exploit and identify where we need to inspect further to look for further cases spreading. So it's in a way a mechanism to contain the virus. That would be one. The other angle would be if we knew how viruses are spreading geographically, then based on that predictions, we can then start influencing the vaccine companies to then generate vaccine for certain strains and at what pace we want those strains to actually be manufactured. In fact, some of this already happens. So WHO, for example, looks at flu viruses every year and actually makes a classification of which flu vaccines do we need to produce for that particular year. And based on that, other companies are actually producing vaccines. So some of that already exists, but I'm sure there will be more that can be done with the true power of AI.
So is healthcare the most prominent area for AI investment and AI development, or is that just one of quite a few areas that are currently quite dynamic?
There are a number of areas and it is dynamic, but I do believe healthcare is where there's a lot happening at the moment in AI. A particular big area is in genome sequencing, so where there's lots of treatments being applied specific to the individual, like treatment for cancer, for example, based on the genetic buildup of that particular individual. If you can develop a drug that would specifically tailor for that particular person, then it's proven to be much more effective as a cure. But to be able to analyze the genome sequencing for that particular individual is a very difficult problem. But there's a lot of research, a lot of work being done in using AI to understand the genetic buildup of a person so that you can treat them based on specific drugs tailored to them. So I think that's the big area. Healthcare definitely is an area. And in fact, a lot of all the companies that are predicting the use of AI, they're also saying the same thing, that healthcare will be an area in the next 4 or 5 years we'll see huge benefit from AI use cases.
Let's say that a time traveler came back to see us this afternoon from 20 years in the future, and you asked them about AI. What do you think they would say? What kind of world do you think they'd be describing? And what lessons could we learn from what they say about the development of artificial intelligence?
Okay, I will say what I hope they will say would be that artificial intelligence has been used only for all the good that we've seen, that we've cured so many diseases. We don't have diseases in the world anymore. We've stopped aging, for example, and we're able to recover from illnesses at a much faster rate than we used to be able to. So those are the kind of things I would hope they would come back and say. And I really hope they don't come back and say that there has been a major security incident, cybersecurity incident that's taken out everything in the world. And I really hope that wouldn't happen. And I think we are working as an entity. We are investing heavily in cybersecurity already as a human race to try to understand the impact of AI in cybersecurity. So as long as they don't come back and say that, yeah, there's been a cybersecurity incident and it's wiped out the whole of humankind, I'll be happy.
And if you were a betting man?
I would say, just looking historically, there will be incidents for sure. I'm confident of that. But it's just how quickly we'll be able to control those incidents will be where we'll see what happens. I wouldn't bet against there being any incident. I would definitely say there will be incidents. And I would also bet that the countermeasures will also have evolved heavily. But here's a question for you, back to Richard. So if, let's say, an alien race was to come to Earth, I should say, and look at Earth from a distance. Let's say they landed on the moon and they're looking at Earth. What do you think the first thing is that they will observe on Earth from that distance?
When I thought about this recently, I wondered actually, so flip that around, and if you took somebody from the 1960s and put them into 2020, what would they think was the same? What would they think was different? And this is my way of answering your great question, is I think they'd look around and go, well, you still drive cars, work jobs, eat hamburgers, and chat to people. It seems pretty similar. And then I think what they would see over the coming days is actually there's some profound differences in the way that we communicate and in the individualism that we now see. And I think that the thing that would shock them most is the hectic rate of which we go about our day. So I think that the aliens will look down on us, turn to each other, and ask one question: why are they so busy?
Okay, that's excellent. So here's another perspective of it. Here's what I think would happen. If you looked at Earth from say, the moon, the first thing you would observe is all the lights. At nighttime, when you look at the image of Earth from space, you see a lot of light, and you can actually see the shape of different continents based on the light that's shining from those continents. So the first thing from a distance would be, okay, you've got lights, and you would see that, okay, the lights are interconnected through electricity. So that means that all of these devices are connected to each other. The whole Earth is connected up through electricity in some form. And then you would look closer and you'd see that, okay, through this electricity, there's actually some kind of data being transmitted between the electrical nodes. So from lights, it's going through the PCs, it's going through the windmills, it's going through all the different things that you see on Earth. They're all interconnected and they're all talking to each other. And then you dig deeper and you find that actually there's a lot of meaningful data that's going through this machine of spider web of devices. And you know, they're actually signaling each other, they're communicating to each other, there's some kind of connection happening. And these entities somehow, they have emotions between them. You know, when certain types of messages come, it's having an adverse effect on those people, those systems. And all of this, so this whole planet seems to be alive with this communication, right? And the planet is alive, and these nodes are being used to communicate. The whole planet is talking to each other. So this looks like there's a whole universe here that's built around this electricity and these nodes and the whole communication. Oh, and in between all of this, there seem to be these so-called humans, but they seem to be talking to each other in some language we don't understand. But that's not relevant for us. I see a world that's interconnected and talking to each other.
That's beautiful. And let's say those aliens landed and they were an advanced species. What gift would you like? What technological gift would you like today from them? You can have one.
Will it be the aliens that land? Or will it be an AI engine that an alien has sent because it's too far for an alien to travel themselves to come and land? So if it's a technology that's coming and landing, who is the technology going to communicate with? Is it to be the human they communicate with? Or will it be the machines and the AI that we've built here that are communicating with each other in this upside down universe that we spoke about earlier on?
Unless the gift, of course, was a warp drive that they used to travel here in the first place, which we see is feasible. And they are looking at the Einstein space-time continuum to get here. But you're right. The distance suggests that our ultimate future will be as machines, not as humans, or at least some version of those. Yeah. And actually, we do see that already. We see robots now that are no longer hard and made out of metals and plastics, but are fluid and made genetically. And it strikes me that the differentiation that we have at the moment between meat and metal is already starting to fade, and that era may already be coming in where it's not so clear what is human and what is non-human.
That's right. So I think, the digital universe, if there's one takeaway from this podcast, I think is to think of the whole digital universe as a parallel universe that we are living in. And that parallel universe is growing exponentially, and we are essentially just the tip of the iceberg. And there's a humongous iceberg underneath the ocean that we can't see and we don't fully understand. And that's where it's all happening.
On that bombshell, I'll say thank you for today.
Thank you for having me, Richard. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Naveen. Thanks for joining me for this episode. I hope you enjoyed the conversation with Dr. Naveen Thomas. If you have recommendations for the show or guests that you would like to hear from, then please get in touch. You can reach me directly through my email, richard@fosterfletcher.com. I invite your advice always on how to make this the best it can be.